Hey everyone, welcome to the SwiftKick show. I know folks are starting to roll in at the moment, so we'll give everyone a second. I'm solo, so if you've been a member of the SwiftKick show before, you know a very guest who joins me and just drops a lot of, and that's going to happen today because there is no special guest. And I'm not really going to drop knowledge as so much as I'm going to drop bombs, but I'll let you be the words. Please ignore my messy office. I'm currently in the middle of a move. That means it gets moved into the center room and sorted out as it goes outside. For example, the smoothie maker. If you want a smoothie maker, that's just going into the trash. I'll just give it away to whoever wants it. So there is a chat on the right side of the screen. I would any or all feedback during the presentation. This is going to be pretty mellow, pretty laid back. It's more of a. I would love to have a chat with you all about anything that we talk about here in this show. But as we get rolling, I'm going to go ahead and walk through a couple different slides. So let me know where you're from in the chat as people. So once again, thank you for coming to the SwiftKick show. Just a little bit about SwiftKick as we get going. SwiftKick is a software training and consulting company that I own. We're based out of Chesapeake, Virginia. And I have made my entire based off of training people and just teaching that I know. So is my show continues that mission going forward. Now we're on the social. We have our Twitter and our LinkedIn, our Facebook, and also our YouTube channel. Any connections that you can make on any of those social media sites would be greatly welcomed, especially we are staying close to that 100 subscribers milestone, and that's the one where I can get the vanity URL for the site. So if you're not subscribed to our SwiftKick YouTube channel, if you don't mind, take a moment and head over there, subscribe, and hit that bell and stuff. That's all the YouTube people say. Hit the bell for cool new stuff. And eventually, these webinars end up on YouTube. So there's already. Haven't seen one of our shows in the past, just go back and kind of look through our catalog. And we're also working on some great new content to put up there here in the future. Speaking of coming soon or in the future, we have next couple weeks, we have Linda Nichols. She will be speaking on Valentine's Day. And Linda is a guaranteed good time in terms of learning and knowledge absorption. What is she going to talk about? I have absolutely no idea. She hasn't let me in on that yet. So hopefully it's going to be something really super exciting. Linda, we have Josh Carlisle, a good friend of mine I've known for a very long time. He's going to be talking about Azure Functions and being, if you are doing anything in the serverless space, a couple of weeks ago we talked about serverless in general, but this week around we're going to talk about Azure Functions specifically. And Microsoft recently dropped some cool new features that will actually end up inside a job talk. It kind of has to. He's not about old stuff. He's going to talk to you about the new exciting stuff. Then the following March, we have Encore and John. I have no idea what Encore is going to talk about. And John, after today, he's going to talk probably UX related. He's a good friend of mine from Charlottesville, Virginia, and he's a UX expert. So I'm hoping he comes in and drops some knowledge. So for that, I'm just going to introduce myself. So I'm going to switch over to my actual talk, and which is thing right here, which is about SignalR for ASP.NET Core 2, or in SignalR ASP.NET Core 2. Let's take a look and see. All right, I have a couple folks in the chat. So how y'all doing? Jason? Well, I'm assuming that you're in the webinar because you're chatting in the webinar. So let me know if everything's coming okay. From my side, it says it's all coming through fine. So feedback in the chat. Hi, Chris. I see you there. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. I playing SignalR for a very long time, since the betas very many years ago. And I'm going to talk about kind of the history, or how it came, and kind of where are we with it now. If you've never met or seen me before, my name is Kevin Griffin. I'm a Microsoft MVP specializing in ASP.NET, and I'm very active on the web, kevgriffin.com and swiftkick.in, or my sites that I maintain. Don't judge me on swiftkick.in. We're actually in the middle of a full relaunch of that. You kind of trail on that last 10% to actually get where we are right now. I am going to talk about Super Alpha. And the great thing about this talk is I'm going to show alpha stuff, but you need to remember that it's alpha. So if you, it's totally up to you what happens. And I'm going to, I am using this in production now. I want to talk about some of the problems I've run into with the alpha software and kind of where the team is heading. I try to be a little bit active, just watching the GitHub issues and seeing what people are talking about and where's the roadmap at. But if you decide to use this stuff in production, your mileage might vary. And I'll tell you about what I in particular ran into. All right, so let's head to the next slide. So if you've never heard of SignalR before, which is a really good possibility, SignalR was released back in 2013 on top of ASP.NET, the full framework. And this was around the time that websites were starting to migrate to a more real-time, more client-like aspect. And we really needed to make sure that our web applications were able to provide communication in pseudo real time, meaning it doesn't need to be immediate, but it needs to be really close to immediate. And the way we typically solve the problem of a web client or a client in general talking back to a web server was through a polling mechanism. So the client would say every 10 seconds, go to the web server and ask it if there's any new information. And that wasn't a horrible approach, but it wasn't really the best approach either, because our clients could talk back to the server 100,000 times and never have any updates. Wouldn't it be more realistic to use something like WebSockets, which was an up-and-coming protocol, or a couple other lesser-known protocols like Server Send Events or Forever Frame? And so all this stuff happened. People rejoiced. It was all fantastic gravy. And the big downside was it only supported ASP.NET full framework, which wasn't a big deal if your application was on ASP.NET full framework. But then this little thing called ASP.NET Core came along. And if you followed the jump from ASP.NET full framework to ASP.NET Core, you know that they moved the cheese, and not in the philosophical sense. Like, they just changed everything. You could barely tell the difference between an ASP.NET full framework app and an ASP.NET Core app. And one of the big things that broke during that transition was that, well, SignalR didn't work anymore, because the bits in ASP.NET full framework that were required for SignalR weren't there in ASP.NET Core. So the team actually realized that, and they created some hacked together versions of SignalR that worked. And I use worked in the loosest sense, because you could create a SignalR server on in your web app, and you could connect to it and it would work. Like the clients and the servers could talk to each other. but it wasn't officially supported, and it was really flaky. I actually used it on a couple little applications, and we ran into a couple different issues. But back on September 14th, there's just a blog post that commemorates this. The first alpha release of SignalR for ASP.NET Core was released. And there's a little bit of information in that post that describes what's new in SignalR versus what was in SignalR before. And kind of my hope for this talk and just our chat for the next couple minutes is to describe what the changes are, but then walk you through what a new SignalR application would look like with the new bits. Not going terribly deep into anything because, again, this is really alpha stuff. And I don't want to show you something today and just have it radically change tomorrow, because it's really my luck that I would do this presentation today and they drop the new alpha release tomorrow. And that wouldn't be good for anyone. So a couple little things. First is the new JavaScript client in SignalR Core. And if you had done SignalR in the past and you had built a web client, you know that you had a jQuery dependency. And it wasn't a loose jQuery dependency. It was a hard, you had to have a particular version or higher of jQuery if you wanted to use SignalR on the client. Or you could just write your own client altogether. And that's not really a good solution for anyone. In SignalR for ASP.NET Core 2, we have a new client, and there's no jQuery dependency. It is written with TypeScript from the ground up, which means I can easily use it in my own TypeScript applications. I could use it if I'm just writing pure ES6. It's all installable through NPM, Node Package Manager. And it's got cross-platform support, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, everything, including all of the old IEs, which is really useful because not many things coming out nowadays will support IE back to 9, let alone like 10, in some cases not even 11. So it's really nice that we have this cross-browser support that's baked in. So a couple other notable things that are inside of SignalR Core 2 is, if we went back to old SignalR, the transport protocol pretty much for a client to the server was through JSON. If the server needed to send something back, it would create a JSON payload and send the JSON back. And likewise, if the client sent message up to the server, it was all JSON. And there's nothing wrong with JSON, except JSON can be a little chatty because it's all text. And now it's not XML chatty, but it's still chatty. In SignalR for ASP.NET Core, we still have support for JSON, and that's default. You don't even have to do anything, and you'll get JSON. But there's also support for the new MessagePack protocol. And MessagePack, I haven't actually experimented with this yet in the new SignalR builds because there is little to absolutely no documentation about enabling it and kind of using it. And the projects I have, we just kind of have to get out the door. So there's really no room for experimentation. But if we look at MessagePack, this is kind of the general idea that it's like JSON. And I love what it says. It's like JSON, but it's fast and small, because we're not representing our intent by using things like curly braces and quotes. We're just using bytes. And it's not intended for you as the developer to necessarily understand or read this. It's for a machine to read and interpret. So this can take what would be a standard piece of JSON, 27 bytes, and reduce it down to 18 bytes. And I know what you're saying is, Kevin, you're not really saving anything. But SignalR's packages and the packages you might be sending down could be extremely large in size, might be hundreds of bytes. Well, with MessagePack, by taking advantage of it, we can probably reduce that size 30–40%, if not more, just depending on what your payload looks like. So this is going to be really useful over the next couple of months as SignalR kind of polishes itself. And I would almost use this as the de facto standard once we get out of the alpha phases. Another big revelation of inside of SignalR for ASP.NET Core is that we no longer have a single connection that's maintained between a client and a server. If you've never done SignalR before in the past, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But in SignalR 1, SignalR 2, there was a single connection that kind of ruled them all. You could have multiple entry ports into the app, but there was always one connection. So let's assume I have, I'll use an example from an actual production app we have right now. We have a chat hub for some real-time chat that we have going on. We have a notification hub that we use to send down client-side notifications like, hey, you got a message, or hey, this thing got updated. We also have some administrative hubs that are used to ensure that people are in line. So an administrator can kick a user off the site or redirect them just at a click of a button. That's all maintained by another hub. And then we have hubs for very unique circumstances. So consider a hub in SignalR in the same way as you would a controller in ASP.NET MVC. It's a single place for a logic based off of your need. Well, in SignalR for ASP.NET Core, there is a connection for every single hub, which is really useful from my standpoint because now I really don't have to centralize all my SignalR logic. If you look at one of my old SignalR applications or any old SignalR application, you had a situation where you would have one kind of server, and that server would go connect one service that would connect to the server, and the server would maintain the connection to all these different hubs. Well, if the chat hub needed to send a message, it had to go through the central service to send it up. If the administrative notification service had to send something, it would go through the same service to send something up to the server. So it really took the idea of single responsibility, well, it combined all those responsibilities into one place. And if you wanted to really break everything out, you had to do a lot of work on your own. It wasn't a quick, easy thing to do. In SignalR for ASP.NET Core, because we have multiple hubs and hub connections now, it means that I could have a service for my chat, and my chat just cares about the connection to the chat hub. And then I could have a notification service, and it cares about its connection up to a notification hub. They're two separate connections altogether. And this makes it easier on the server standpoint for things like authentication and middleware. And if I'm on the client, doing things like subscribing to events is just a lot easier to do as well, because I might only care about connection issues for the chat hub, but not so much for the notification hub. I can worry about each hub and each hub connection independently. The next big difference, and I'm going to call this a big difference because they're actually taking a lot out of the box, is scaling out your applications. In SignalR 1, you could really scale out across a variety of backends. You had support for Redis server, SQL server, Azure Service Bus, or you could even quickly add your own if you wanted to. And the big thing in ASP.NET, I'm sorry, SignalR for ASP.NET is that you can't really use any of those except for Redis. And the functionality that you get with the Redis backend is not nearly as useful as what you would have gotten in the old versions of SignalR. The number one question I get from folks is, Kevin, why is scale out really needed on an ASP.NET application? And I always end up going to a whiteboard or bringing up a picture that looks something like this. So I'm hoping I can demonstrate it in a way that really makes a little bit of sense. So let's imagine this is my environment. This is my app running behind the cloud. And I'm sorry, Paint doesn't really have a cloud shape. It has this chat bubble, which looks like a cloud, so it's close enough. So just go with me here. The cloud is the internet. Well, let's play with an example where I have a variety of clients out there on the internet, and they're all calling into my web application. So, and on the other side here, I have my server. So server 1, server 2, server 3, and server 4. And these are all the same version of the application, just running in some sort of scaled environment. As a client connects up into the server, so client 1 connects to the cloud, it goes through a load balancer. And load balancers have one job, and that job is to balance the load between the multiple web servers that you have going. So it's likely that if the red client is making a connection through my load balancer, it is going to get routed to one of these 4 servers. So we go through the web balancer, and then it goes up into client number 1. So that's cool. Well, let's pick another client over here, and I'll change my color a little bit. Well, let's take client blue over here. And client blue connects to the same server or same load balancer, but the load balancer says, I don't want you to go to server 1. I want you to go to server number 4. So I have client red on server 1 and client blue is over here on server 4. And then let's imagine orange, yellow, green. They're all connecting to one of these 4 servers. Now the use case is, let's assume these are WebSockets, or they could even be long polling or some sort of connection up to their individual servers. Well, this can be an issue when we're dealing with something like notifications. So client A does something, it sends a message up into its server, and this server needs to broadcast to all the clients that can possibly be connected. Say, red said, hello world. Well, on server 1, it's going to broadcast to everyone that it knows about. But the problem is it only knows about the people that it's connected to. It doesn't know about all these other servers, and it doesn't know about all these other connections of what's connected. So we use a scale out or backplane to make this connection across all the different servers. So if we were to create a backplane and just call this Redis, well, every server connects to this backplane. So now when red sends a message up to its server through its connection, the server is responsible for communicating across the backplane. Red said, hello world. So this message travels up the pipe through the backplane down to every connected client. Now, that's just a very broad explanation of how backplanes work and how scale-out works. And I'm going to tell you, because I'm learning this the hard way, this is not perfect in the alpha version of SignalR for ASP.NET Core 2. I'm running into a lot of problems if I'm trying to specify particular clients that I'm trying to send messages to. But that's kind of the outside the scope of what I was going to talk about today. Now, I could just keep talking, but it's more useful to show you some code and show you what a SignalR application would look like. So I'm going to jump over to some command line. And all right, so here on the command line, I'm going to create a new application. We'll just say new MVC app. All right, we'll go into Visual Studio Code. All right, and I'll go into my CS project. I'm going to add a reference here for package, and we're going to include this Microsoft ASP.NET Core SignalR. And the version is, I don't ever remember the version, so let me go look at the version real fast. And the version is 1.0 to final. So it's not really final, it's almost final. So we'll say .NET Restore. And of course I got my see .NET Restore again. All right, so it brings in APnet Core, SignalR, the correct version. Yep. Some code real fast. So I'm going to create a hubs. This is not how things worked in old SignalR. You still have a hub, and a hub is kind of like a controller in MVC. It's a place to put content and connections to your server. I'm going to go with the old tried and true example of a chat hub. So we'll come in here, and I'm going to create a public class called chat hub. And a chat hub is a chat hub because it implements or inherits from hub. And hub is inside of the Microsoft ASP.NET Core SignalR namespace. And then inside of this, we'll create a private static list of let's call messages, and let's go ahead and create a controller. So we'll say message equals new list of string. I know. There we go. I don't use the music. There we go. All right. So what we want to do is we want to come back and we're going to add some functionality so someone can basically write a message to our application. So let's go ahead and write a client method, and this client method is going to be an async task called broadcast message, and it's going to take a message parameter. Let's see, I've done this a couple different ways, but we can say, all right, message. Let's add a new message called message. But then let's go ahead and broadcast this message to anyone who is currently connected to our hub. So we'll do that with the clients object. So we get clients because we're inheriting from hub. So hub gives us clients, and clients object represents everyone who's currently connected to our chat hub. And if we're running behind a Redis backplane, it can represent anyone who's connected to any of our servers through SignalR. Well, I just want to tell it, all right, I want to tell all clients that I want to invoke the method writeMessage and pass in my message object. So I say async, all right. And it's complaining because I don't have using statements. That's all right. I can fix that. Oh, there we go. All right. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm kind of done at the moment. Let me jump over to my web view. Actually, let me jump over to my startup. Oh, if you haven't done anything in ASP.NET Core yet, this startup CS might look a little foreign to you because it's really not something you had to spend too much time in. But in ASP.NET Core, there's two major things you have to do as an application starts up. The first thing is configure services. And this tells ASP.NET how it should handle dependency injection. So you see my first line here is add MVC. And that tells ASP.NET that when it sees any of the I somethings for MVC to inject the implementations that are provided by the MVC platform. This also gives you the opportunity to overwrite any functionality that you want to do. But we're not going to worry about that. We're going to add our own for SignalR. So I can say add SignalR dependencies into the ASP.NET Core pipeline. And we'll scroll down a bit. I have a couple different things in configure. So configure is where we actually configure all of our endpoints. We configure our request pipeline. If someone were to send a request to our web server, what should it do? How should it do it? Most of this we're not going to mess with. We're just going to add here to the end. And I'm going to say use SignalR. And I'm going to pass in this configure lambda. I'm going to tell configure that I want to map a hub called Chat Hub. Now, this is a little bit different than what we had to do in old SignalR. In old SignalR, all this kind of happened by accident or automatically. But now, as we get into kind of a new, improved SignalR, we have to be a little bit more upfront with how we named everything. So I have to tell SignalR specifically that I need to create a route called Chat Hub that points to my Chat Hub in code. So this Chat Hub is accessed through this command line. If we were looking at this from a URL, this is really, say, localhost 5000 / Chat Hub. That's how ASP.NET figures it all out. So you can make this path anything that you want. But just for ease of understanding, I'll just call it Chat Hub, so everything matches up. If you have multiple hubs, you're going to do this multiple times. So if I went to one of my production apps, I have a notification hub, I have an administrative task hub, I have et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They all have their own hubs. So if you have this, we can then jump over to our web app. So I'll create a new index.html file. And let's see. I'm also going to turn on default, use default files. So we see that. And let's see, HTML5. We'll call this our SignalR demo. Now, we have to set up some script tags. And we have to go get the SignalR client. So how do you get the SignalR client? Well, that's out on NPM. So we have SignalR. And let's see. And it's really ASP.NET. ASP.NET SignalR client. Here it is right here. All right, so we have this install path. And the reason I say specifically the @ASP.NET is because if you just said SignalR by itself, you get the old SignalR clients, and the two are not compatible at all. If you're using old SignalR, you use this SignalR package. But if you use a new SignalR, you want the new SignalR package. So we can go into our command line, and I'm going to cd into our root. And I'll do npm install. Oh, I have the full path, don't I? Go and install that real fast. All right, let's go back into Visual Studio Code. And I need to drop a link to that script tag. And let's see, there we go. I'm going to drop it in the top. I know you're not supposed to, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'll say chat. And what I want to do real fast is just make sure everything works. So we'll say .NET Run. There we go. All right, so I have my chat up here and working. So let's go back into the code. First thing I like to do is just set up a little bit of HTML. So let's go ahead and format our document. I have an input box, so I can type some text. I have a button to send with, and then I have an or list of messages that will get sent. Let's go up to the top of the screen here, and let's go ahead and write some of our script. All right, first things first, we have to create a connection to our chat hub. And this is done. I'm doing this with just straight ES5, not really taking advantage of ES6 or TypeScript or anything else. So I'm doing this the hard way. But if you're writing this in TypeScript or in ES6, you would import or require your SignalR package. You wouldn't have to include the script like this. And it would work a little bit more fluently. I'm technically doing things the hard way just for some simplicity. I'm going to create a new SignalR hub connection. And what we do here is we tell it connect to my chat hub. So this path should be the same as that path. Then I have to start my connection. And this is what does all the really fun stuff, like determining how the connection should happen. Is it over WebSockets? Do you need to fall back to something like long polling or server send events? It's all done through the start. So assuming it all works correctly, we'll say connected in our console. And like all good programmers, we'll put a big old to-do right here in the middle because it really doesn't do anything at the moment. All right, so if that code's running, let's bring up our console. Let's do a very quick test. All right, so we're good here. I'll zoom in a little for the chat. So the page loaded. The first log message here, this is SignalR telling us that it took my /chat hub and it normalized it to a fully qualified URL. So it's localhost 5000 /chat hub, not just /chat hub. Then negotiation happens. And because I'm running on Windows 10, I'm using the latest and greatest. I have WebSocket support. If you're running on older versions of Windows, and more importantly, older versions of IIS in production, you may or may not have WebSocket support available to you. So there's a worst case where it would fall back. But I have full WebSocket support, and you can see that the connection has taken place. And it's using the JSON Hub protocol. Remember a moment ago I talked about MessagePack? Well, we could use MessagePack as well as our protocol. And my connect to message pops up, so we're all good to go. So let's fill in these to-dos. Well, the first to-do is going to be what happens when we receive a message. On older versions of SignalR, you had what were called proxies. And SignalR would basically reflect over your hub and figure out what methods you had available to you and what methods you could actually call from the client. And would build out this really nice JavaScript interface for you to use. That does not exist anymore in the current way. You have to take a little bit more JavaScript-y approach to making calls back up to the server. And that's done with classic event handling. So if I tell my connection on an event called write message, I want to take a new message in, and I'll tell it, all right, the new message is written, but then let's just write a little bit of code that spits this out to our unordered list. And I'm just going to copy and paste. So get a reference to our message list down below. this guy. Let's create a list item. Let's add our message into the list item and then append that list item into the list. So what should happen is that we add a new bullet point to the end of the unordered list. All right. Well, that's cool. And that's really great for receiving messages, but then how do we send messages? Well, I've already set up the button to handle the on-click event for send message. And I'll just copy and paste that code in real fast. We'll do it right down here at the bottom. Send message grabs the value out of the text box, and then we ask our connection to invoke the method broadcast message, passing in that string value. SignalR sends this up to the chat hub and calls broadcast message. So this broadcast message and that broadcast message should be the same, and passes the value. Or I could send an object or a string of parameters, and they all get passed in as parameters into this method. So the message comes in. I know I create this list, but I'm not really going to do anything with it. So when I push this up to GitHub, you can play with it later. Message comes in. We tell SignalR, tell all of our clients to invoke the method write message and just pass the message through. I know that's really safe, right? Well, that message comes and SignalR goes to every client and executes its write message event, passing in that string, and then it writes it out to the screen. So assuming I did all that correctly, let's do a quick refresh here. All right, so we're reconnected, and I'm going to say hello, and I spit out hello to the screen. So, you know, write stuff out to the console, and I did it wrong. So that shouldn't have quotes around it, Kevin. What were you thinking? But all right, well, let's take this same example and let's create another instance of our control. I'm going to set these side by side. Let's go and refresh this page, and we'll say hello. Okay, and we go to the other side and say world, and everything is working the way that we expect it to. We could also just fire up a new browser altogether. So let me get Firefox into the mix. Wherever Firefox is. All right, come on, Firefox. Really, Firefox? All right, let's go ahead and get Edge into the mix. Yeah, I've been trying Firefox as my primary browser, and I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. It is faster, it does take up less memory, but dang, it updates all the time. It doesn't upgrade in the background, it upgrades in the foreground, which is really annoying. All right, so send the same message from Edge. It goes out to every browser that's connected. This is a truly real-time application because I can impact one client through an external source. So that is a very just rough example of using SignalR in its new way, shape, or form. And this is really useful because now, all this code, so this is maybe for a chat service. Well, this can go under its own dedicated chat service. I don't have to explicitly have the client code for the chat, the notifications, the admin functions, et cetera, all combined, and then have to broadcast these messages out. It's really useful for me to have all this under one single object and one level of responsibility. All right, I'll do a quick look at the chat. Anyone out there in the chat as I jump back over the slides real fast? All right, so, what's that? You said Backplane. So Chris, you said Backplane is only supported with Redis in the preview release. That is correct. The GitHub issues are leaning towards also having support for Azure Service Bus, but that's nothing that's baked in the current version. And I don't know how long it would be until they get the service bus. But it's like all great things in ASP.NET. You can write your own provider. So if you wanted to have your own Backplane provider, you can do that. Chris, again, do you know if they're rethinking the whole backplane concept, or we're just at early stage with sticky session recommendation? We're at early stage. I think they are rethinking everything, but they have it all fully there. You require sticky sessions if you're using anything other than WebSockets. And so sticky sessions, for anyone that's not means with a backplane provider like this. If I'm red and always connect to the first server, I will always connect to the first server. So the load balance to my request response that says every request should always server number 1. Likewise for blue always gets server number 4. And the only reason it would not get server number 4 is if server number 4 was taken out of set. Which, if I'm with, let's say long polling. Long polling, I have a whole slide on this, I think. Yes. Yep. So long polling basically says server or client red makes a connection, and it's going to hold that connection up, or that's the normal timeout for browsers. If the server needs to send anything back down the line, use it that existing open connection. Well, after the connection closes, establish the connection. The current support mechanism for SignalR means it always needs to connect to the same server. And if it doesn't reconnect to that server, you're to a couple issues. Now, in the old SignalR, you could have sticky sessions turned off, and red could connect to number 1, it could connect to number 3, it could connect number 2, or so on and so on. It doesn't matter. The backplane was a little bit more, well, I think they ran into more issues just trying to support that ecosystem. So that's why with the current alpha, they're saying, hey, you have to have sticky sessions turned on unless you're using WebSockets, because WebSockets will almost guarantee that you're always connected to the same server. I guess it really doesn't support an edge case where that WebSocket disconnects and the WebSocket has to reconnect itself. But that's my understanding of it at the moment. In terms of protocols, we have kind of all the basic ones. So WebSockets is the holy grail. That's the one you really want to use because it's bidirectional. The client can talk up to the server can talk down to the client, and it's all over one pipe and one single connection. If we were to fall back a little, we could do just a combination of HTTP post, which is the client talking to the server, with something like server send events or long polling. Server send events is an old technology where the server can send events down to any connected clients. But it's only one way. This is the server talking to the client and not the client talking to the server. And there's also long polling, which is the same. The client establishes the connection, and if the server needs to send anything down, it uses the open connection to send that data back. The one that's missing from the list, and I haven't heard anything about, is Forever Frame. Forever Frame is another server-to-client communication protocol, but it's been typically limited to old IEs, and I don't think it's really necessary in the current web ecosystem. So it doesn't surprise me that it's not included in the list. It could be, but just not right now. I will go ahead and take a moment, if anyone has any other questions, to just talk about a couple of the little issues I've run into in production using SignalR Alpha. The big one is specifically around WebSockets, and it's WebSockets lifetime. The problem I've run into is I will open a WebSocket, and then after a couple minutes, if that WebSocket has no communication on it, the WebSocket drops. And I figured, okay, Kevin, that's really not a big deal. I'll just reestablish the WebSocket. Come to find out, and you always want to find these things out close to go live, is they don't support WebSocket reconnections out of the box. So there's, in the current alpha release, a WebSocket cannot reconnect. So you have to actually recreate the connection from scratch reestablish all your events, and then restart the connection, which is kind of a pain in the butt to do whenever a connection drops. I've been able to get around this issue by having my client periodically, every 10 seconds, just send a ping package up to the server. So every 10 seconds, just kind of goes ping a couple bytes, and that's enough to keep the connection open long term. And it still drops, but it drops after hours, but not after minutes, and that's a big help. It is useful. I know it's coming in the next release, whenever that is. They will have reconnection support, and they will also have better keep alive support for WebSockets. It's just not in the current release. I've also had problems with identifying connections. So I have a particular use case where we have two servers in a load balance set, and I might have people connected to one server and people connected to the other server. And let's say I need to send a notification to only client blue. Well, it's very difficult for me to say send that to just client blue, because the Backplane really only supports all clients, and in limited cases, you can identify a client by their authorized name, so their username, whoever they're logged in as. If you try to map the connection IDs themselves, you're supposed to be able to send directly to a connection ID, or send to everyone except a collection of connection IDs. I have not had that work fluently every single time. So we've ended up having to step back a little and rethink our mechanism for sending broadcasts out to particular users. It works great when we're broadcasting to all users, but not so great when we're broadcasting to very specific users in our ecosystem. But with that, I'm getting about close to my hour. But the final thoughts, I don't have a slide for it, but SignalR is really up and coming. It's a really nice technology, and it's getting mature, and I'm really interested in seeing where it's going to go in the next couple of months, because I think they're getting ready for the next release, which I was hoping it would come out before this talk. But you can only push people so fast, and like all good open source projects, they accept pull requests, and I haven't submitted anything, so I'm in no room to talk. But with that, I will hang around for another moment for questions if there are any. If not, I would love to thank everyone for hanging out with me today. It's been a pleasure, and I'm going to talk a lot more about SignalR in social media. I had a course on SignalR, old SignalR, which I'm going to revamp for the new core bits. I'm going to let the new core bits get a little bit more mature before writing some of that material, though. It's not really worth it to do right now. But keep an eye on my Twitter, at @1KevGriff, or the SwiftKick Twitter is also a good place. But with that, if there's no other questions, have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. All right. I'll hang out for just a second. All right. Well, you all take care. Have a great day.